And it turns out that Cheese Whiz, which sounds like something you might be sold on a dark corner in Camden, is really only marketed in Canada, Mexico, the United States, the Philippines, and Venezuela. Hello, I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to things and stuff. Particularly things and stuff for which the other country doesn't have a word. Now you may remember that a few weeks ago I did a video that touched on these very things. 8 American things that Britain doesn't even have a word for. Well, prepare yourself for the greatest sequel since The Empire Strikes Back, The Two Towers and Psycho 3. Because this is 8 American things that Brits don't even have a word for, Part 2, Return of the Hush Puppy. And so, after 13 years of living in the United States, what other crazy things do we not have back in my homeland? Let's take a look. What a surprise! We're going to begin this list, just as we're going to end it, with American food. Tater Tots. What the heck are Tater Tots? Well, many years ago when my wife suggested that we eat Tater Tots as a starter / appetizer, I thought she'd lost her mind and was ordering from the kids menu. But it turns out that Tater Tots, which are a kind of grated potato that are deep fried and turned into a cylinder, are popular among many Americans, no matter the person's age or ability to make healthy choices. And while we love a good potato in Britain, the closest I came to experiencing anything like this was devouring a fish cake. And I know what you're thinking, Lawrence, you've lost your blooming marbles. Fish and potato are not the same thing. But a lot of fish cake is battered, and for me, the best kind does include potato. Either way, Tater Tots, they're best with ketchup, unlike these. And while that was a terrible segue, can you remember a few weeks ago when I said this? The word car hop has nothing to do with dogs because that would be mental. Furthermore, a car hop is not a type of car that hops because see previous comment. Well, I was reminded by Jeff, one of my longtime patrons, that America does have cars that hop, and not just Herbie. Lowrider cars are exactly as they sound. They're specifically customized to have a lower body, right? A bit like a wrestler after multiple back surgeries. And, you know, I'm not a mechanic, I don't understand how it all works. But basically these cars have a height adjustable suspension that allows them to do things that would make the Transformers themselves. And while lowriders were popular in West Coast hip-hop and featured in the music videos of Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, us Brits aren't cool enough to drive anything like this, but then again we did give the world the Mini. Meanwhile, Jeff on Patreon is on a roll because he also brought to my attention this. In the original video, you may remember that I talked about a geological phenomenon known as buttes. Well, there's one other type of phenomenon that, while not exclusive to the United States, it's only found in arid regions of the world that are similar to America's southwest. I'm talking about arroyo. An arroyo is a kind of temporary dry creek or gulch, and they often come about after a series of flash floods. And as you've probably guessed, it's taken from the Spanish word arroyo. In Spanish, arroyo just means any small river. And it's quite comforting to hear that, because if an arroyo magically showed up in the United Kingdom, I think we just call it a stream or an English puddle. Anyway, while we're on the subject of names, that brings us on to this. This entry comes with a little bit of a caveat. In the United States, Miranda Rights, or a Miranda warning, is basically a notification from a police officer warning of your right to remain silent. How do I know this? Because I accidentally fell into the Mississippi naked once. And the term came about not because the arresting officer is called Miranda, though hilariously that probably has happened, but because it derives from the 1966 US Supreme case, Miranda versus Arizona. Anyway, the reason that I said that this one comes with a caveat is that we do have the right to silence in the United Kingdom. We just don't have a single word or person's name that encapsulate it like America does. So with that in mind, why don't I come up with one? From this day forward, the British right to remain silent will be known as Gemma Rights, which I've just realised sounds like my friend's name, Gemma Wright. Now, I do want to stress that there are subtle differences between Miranda rights and the British right to remain silent, but more on that in another video. In the meantime, let's keep going. Every year across the United States, you'll hear this word, homecoming, and that's something I had to explain to my cousin Tom Holland. Homecoming is this huge thing that takes place during September or October where, you know, universities, schools, sometimes entire towns welcome back their alumnus or former community members. And they put on this huge do, which can include a football game, school choirs, marching bands, and they coronate a homecoming queen. And we don't have anything like this in Britain because, you know, we have an actual queen. That said, we do use all of the letters in the word homecoming to declare something else. It's not homecoming, it's coming home. Football's coming home. My American audience is so confused right now. But speaking of ball games, batter up. I'm never doing that again. Many moons ago, during my first summer in the United States of America, I was physically dragged into what I thought was my first ever game of baseball, but baseball for kids. Into my hands was thrust a round bat that was long and thin like my pen collection. Coming at me was a ball, but not one of those heavy balls that I'd come to associate with baseball, but a white perforated plastic ball that looked like one of those things you put in the washing machine. Dramatically, in slow motion, I did hit the ball, but also my mother-in-law's cousin. The game in question, while a variation of baseball, is called Wiffle Ball. And since baseball itself hasn't really made many waves in the United Kingdom, thanks largely to the unfathomable allure of cricket, not to mention the clearly superior game of rounders, Wiffle Ball is way at the back of the queue, to the extent that if we had it in Britain, we'd probably just call it baseball. And with that, I can already sense Americans coming at me with their bats. Put them down, I'm just the messenger. You know what, let's move on to a non-divisive American sport for which the Brits don't have a word. I'm joking. That's right, we return now to America's royal family. You see, whether or not this is true, in my head I imagine that homecoming queens grow up to be really rich. And so by the time this has happened and she moves into the house of her dreams, she spends every night sleeping on top of the California king. And because some people in the world have filthy minds, I should probably clarify that a California king is a size of bed. But then you knew that already if you've seen my video on 5 ways that British and American bedrooms are very different. You see, in the UK, bed sizes end with the Super King, which is 72 inches by 78. Anything after that and we simply don't have a word for it. California King is almost 6 inches longer, and I hope that my Aunt Ethel didn't turn on the video at that sentence. But even though I discussed this in a previous video, I really wanted to include it in this one, because it turns out the California King isn't America's biggest ever mattress size. In fact, it's been beaten to that title by some of America's other all-conquering monarchs. The Wyoming King, a perfect square, measures in at 84 by 84 inches, while no mattress comes close to dethroning the Alaskan King, that measures in at a whopping and quite frankly stupid 108 by 108 inches. Just thinking about that makes me want to go and lie down. But I can't do that yet because we are now ready for our final entry. As has been a theme during this video, today's final entry comes at the suggestion of one of my patrons, Deborah, who asks, is Cheese Whiz a thing in the UK? And the answer is no. But what is Cheese Whiz? Well, Cheese Whiz is basically a processed cheese sauce, and you can put it on many things, but it's arguably most synonymous with Philly cheesesteak. And it turns out that Cheese Whiz, which sounds like something you might be sold on a dark corner in Camden, is really only marketed in Canada, Mexico, the United States, the Philippines, and Venezuela, making it a memo that most certainly got lost in the pond. And there's probably a good many reasons for this, but one of them is that we in Britain are quite proud of our cheeses. Then again, America itself has a host of better cheese offerings than this. And Britain should probably be thankful that Cheese Whiz hasn't made its way into the shopping aisles or the dictionary. That's it for this episode. I'm Lawrence Brown. You can follow me on Twitter at LostInThePondUS, and be sure to subscribe to my channel so that my videos don't get lost in the pond. And finally, an Alaska King size shout out to my patrons who make these videos possible. If you would like to become a patron of Lost in the Pond, you can do so at patreon.com/LostInThePond. Until the next video, goodbye.